Wishing our listeners a happy new day. We will now begin story number 6.
The tie had belonged to my father. Navy blue, thin gold stripe, silk gone soft at the edges from decades of folding. A small coffee stain near the wide end. My father had been gone 52 years, and I would never know the story behind that stain. I found it in a coffee can under his workbench the week after we buried him, wrapped in a handkerchief, a folded note inside, his handwriting. Patty, wear this only for the most important fire of your life. You'll know when. Love, Dad. I was 18. My hands shook reading it. I kept that tie in the same coffee can for 52 years. Through every apartment, every station transfer, the house on K Street, the retirement ceremony where Chief Hannigan told me I was the best man he'd ever served beside. I had never worn it. Until tonight. I stood at the bathroom mirror on K Street, Father's Day, 2024, and knotted that tie for the first time. 70 years old. Retired firefighter. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. Behind me, Maeve sat on the edge of our bed. She was wearing the blue dress, the one from the church thrift sale. Ironed 3 times that morning because the collar kept creasing. She was trying to fasten the top button. Her hands wouldn't cooperate. They hadn't cooperated with much lately. The heart damage did that, pooled the blood, slowed the circulation, made the fingers feel like they belonged to someone else. I turned around, sat beside her, and fastened the button myself. She looked at the tie. 68 years old, 48 years my wife. The woman who had lost her father the same night I lost mine, same fire, same street in South Boston, 1972. We had found each other at the joint funeral, 2 teenagers in borrowed black clothes, and neither of us had let go since. "That's your father's tie," she said. "Yes." "You've never worn it?" "No." She read my face the way she had for 48 years. Then, quietly, "Tonight's the night." Then, "Yes," I said. "Tonight's the night." The manila folder had lived in the locked bottom drawer of my desk for 6 months. That morning, I moved it to the old briefcase, dark brown leather. Brass clasps gone green, and put it in the trunk of the Honda before Maeve woke up. She hadn't asked about it. She knew. She always knew more than she let on. It had started with an envelope. November 14th, 2023. Plain brown. No return address. My son's handwriting, Connor, had a left-leaning script the nuns at St. Gregory's spent 8 years trying to correct. I brought it inside, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. 3 pages. The first was a printed email between 2 addresses, one unfamiliar, one containing the name Chen. I read it twice before I understood, then a 3rd time to be certain. The second was a photograph. A woman I recognized standing outside an apartment building I didn't, holding a small girl on her hip. 3, maybe 4 years old. Dark eyes that didn't belong to anyone in my family. The 3rd was handwritten. 12 lines. "Dad, I'm drowning. I don't know who I am anymore. She controls everything. The money, the schedule, my medication. I think she's been changing my prescriptions. I'm scared. Please help me. Don't tell her you got this. I love you." Connor, I sat at that table for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Maeve's oxygen concentrator ran its quiet rhythm from the next room. I read those 12 lines 4 more times. Then I folded everything back into the envelope, put it in my shirt pocket, finished my coffee, washed the cup, and called Sam Riley, 20 years FBI, now private practice in Quincy. We'd met at a union function in 2006. Sam, I said when he answered. I need everything you can find on a woman named Ashley Caldwell. Married name O'Sullivan. Dentist at St. Elizabeth's. I need it all. How soon? Yesterday, I said. That had been 7 months ago. We left K Street at 5:15. I helped Maeve down the front steps and got her settled in the passenger seat. The Honda made that grinding noise, the transmission I'd been ignoring for 8 months, because we couldn't afford to fix it and the car still ran. The briefcase was in the trunk. I had checked it twice. Maeve put her hand over mine on the gear shift. Cold fingers. Always cold now. Whatever happens tonight, she said. I'm with you. I looked at her. The blue dress. The hospital bracelet still on her wrist from Thursday's appointment she hadn't wanted to worry me about. I know you are, I said. I shifted into drive, in my inside jacket pocket, pressed flat against my ribs, was one more document. Not part of the folder. A single page from a doctor's office on Tremont Street, dated March 3rd, 2024. I had not shown it to Maeve. Some fires. A man carries a loan. The Honda turned south toward the harbor. Somewhere ahead, in a restaurant with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. My son and his wife were already waiting. I knew what was coming. So did my father's tie. The Mariner sat at the edge of Boston Harbor, like it had always been there, and always would be dark wood, brass fixtures, white tablecloths visible through the tall windows. The kind of place where old Boston money came to remind itself it was still old Boston money. I had made the reservation 6 weeks ago, paid the deposit with what was left from my last driving shift. Tony Mancini met us at the door. He was 65, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. We had known each other since 2003, though we had never spoken about the reason why. He shook my hand a beat longer than necessary, and his eyes dropped briefly to the briefcase in my left hand. He gave a small nod. Nothing more. A young waiter materialized beside him. His name tag read, Daniel. 22, maybe 23, dark eyes, the careful posture of someone working hard to make a good impression. He offered to take the briefcase. I'll keep it, I said. He led us to our table corner position, good sightlines to the entrance, the way I had requested. I held Maeve's chair. She sat with visible relief, her left hand going immediately to her side where the swelling was worst. I opened the menu. $42 for a salad, $68 for pasta. I found the bisque soup at $16 and the iced tea at $5 and set the menu down. Daniel returned for our order. I gave it without looking up. Then I positioned my chair so I could watch the door. At 6:32, a black BMW pulled into the valet lane. Ashley got out first. She was 39 years old, and she moved like someone who had decided long ago that every room she entered should rearrange itself around her. Red dress, heels, hair that looked effortless and wasn't. She stood at the entrance and scanned the dining room with the particular expression of someone checking whether the venue met their standards. Connor came around from the driver's side. My son, 44 years old, navy suit, a watch on his wrist that cost more than our monthly mortgage. He had my father's height and his mother's eyes, and somewhere between childhood And now he had acquired a walk I didn't recognize, the walk of a man performing confidence rather than feeling it. I used to be proud of how he carried himself. Tonight, something about it made my chest ache. Daniel led them to our table. Connor spotted us, and his face changed. Something moved across it quickly. Something unguarded. Before the expression settled back into place. He came around the table and hugged Maeve carefully. The way you hug something fragile. His eyes briefly closed. "Happy Father's Day, Dad." He clapped my shoulder. "Son." Ashley touched her cheek to Maeve's. "Maeve, you look tired. Are you eating enough?" Maeve smiled. "I'm fine, sweetheart." I shook my son's hand. He gripped mine harder than necessary and held it a half-second longer than a normal handshake. When I looked at his face, I saw it clearly, not the carelessness I had been expecting. Not indifference. Fear. My son was afraid. Ashley settled into her chair and opened the menu with the ease of someone who had studied it beforehand. "Oh, they have the lobster thermidor." "Babe, we have to get the lobster thermidor." She flagged Daniel without looking up. "And the oysters Rockefeller to start. And a bottle of the Sancerre, the 2019, if they have it." Connor nodded. He picked up his own menu, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. I watched his right hand where it rested on the tablecloth. It was trembling. Not the fine tremor of cold or nerves. A real, sustained tremor, the kind that comes from something systemic. Something that had been building for a long time. He felt me looking and moved his hand below the table. Ashley was already on her phone, angling it toward Maeve and me. "Father's Day family dinner," she narrated brightly for whoever was watching her stories. "My sweet in-laws, aren't they adorable?" I looked directly into the camera. I did not smile. Maeve's hand found mine under the table. Cold fingers, as always. I wrapped my hand around hers and held on. Daniel reappeared. He took Ashley's extended order more dishes, prices that added up fast, and then turned to Maeve with a gentleness that seemed genuine rather than practiced. "And for you, ma'am. The bisque soup." "Please," Maeve said. "That's all." Daniel wrote it down. His eyes moved briefly to the hospital bracelet on her wrist. Then he looked at me just for a moment. A fraction of a second, and something passed across his young face that I couldn't quite name. He collected the menus and left. Ashley set her phone down and reached across to pat Maeve's hand with 2 quick taps. The way you'd acknowledge a child. "It's so good you could make it tonight. Maeve, you must be exhausted." "Not at all," Maeve said. "It's lovely to be out." Connor said nothing. His right hand was back on the table, still trembling. He picked up his water glass, and I watched him fight to keep it steady. In my inside jacket pocket, the unopened document pressed flat against my ribs. In the trunk of the Honda, the briefcase waited. And across the table, my son sat trapped inside a life I was going to have to help him break out of whether he was ready or not. The soup arrived. Maeve wrapped both hands around the bowl for warmth and didn't drink. Neither of us did much talking after that. We waited. I have seen fear on a man's face before. 38 years of fires teaches you that. Fear has a specific look, the eyes go very still, like they're watching something no one else can see. The body stays upright, but something inside it has already started to collapse. That was my son across the table. The appetizers arrived. Ashley's oysters. Connor's tuna tartare. Neither of them had ordered anything for Maeve beyond the soup she had barely touched. The cheese on top had gone cold and rubbery while Ashley worked through her plate without offering so much as a word to anyone. Connor cut into his food. His eyes tracked across his phone screen in the pattern of a man scrolling. But I had watched people long enough to know when someone was actually reading and when they were just moving their thumb to have something to do with their hands. He wasn't reading anything. Ashley set down her fork and reached into her purse for her phone. She turned the camera toward Maeve and me again, her second time tonight, and narrated something bright and hollow for her followers. I held very still and let her film. I had learned in 38 years that the best way to handle a situation you cannot yet control is to give it nothing to react to. Daniel came to refill our water glasses. He moved around the table quietly, efficiently, the way good waiters do, present without intruding. When he reached Maeve's side, he paused for just a beat, looking at her soup bowl, still nearly full. "Is everything all right with the soup, ma'am?" "Lovely," Maeve said. "I'm just not very hungry." Daniel nodded and moved on. But before he turned away, his eyes cut briefly to me, and in them I saw something that had no business being in the eyes of a 22-year-old waiter who had never met us before tonight. Recognition. I filed it away and said nothing. Ashley finished her oysters and signaled for another round. Connor ordered more food without looking at the prices. Maeve sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the harbor through the window, somewhere else entirely. I watched Connor's glass. He had ordered sparkling water. I had seen him do it when Daniel first came around. A quiet refusal of the wine Ashley had ordered for the table. Connor had not touched alcohol in 6 years. He'd told me that himself at Christmas 2018, his first holiday with Ashley, standing in our kitchen while she held court in the living room. "I just feel better without it, Dad," he'd said. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but the glass in front of him now was not the sparkling water he'd ordered. I had watched Ashley pour it when Connor stepped away to use the restroom 15 minutes after they arrived. She'd reached across the table with the wine bottle smoothly, without hesitation. The movement of someone who had done it many times and filled his glass before he returned. Connor had sat back down, picked up the glass without looking at it, and drunk. He was on his third glass now. His hand on the table had stopped trembling. I understood then why the trembling had stopped, and understanding it made everything worse. Ashley looked up from her phone and smiled at Maeve. It was a good smile. She had a very good smile, the kind that reached the eyes just far enough to pass for genuine if you weren't paying close attention. "We should do this more often," she said. "It's so important to stay connected as a family." "It is." Maeve agreed. Connor said nothing. I said nothing. The harbor sat dark and quiet beyond the tall windows, and the restaurant moved around us, conversations, laughter, the soft percussion of silverware, and our little corner of it was an island of careful silence. In my inside jacket pocket, the folded envelope pressed against my ribs. Postmark November 14, 2023. The handwriting on the front was Connor's. The 12 lines inside were Connor's. The fear behind those 12 lines was Connor's. And across the table, my son sat with his third glass of something he hadn't ordered, his hands finally steady, his eyes finally calm. And I thought about what it costs a man to be made to feel crazy in his own life, what it does to him over months, over years. I thought about the note in the coffee can under my father's workbench. "You'll know when." I knew. Daniel appeared at my elbow. He was looking at me with that same expression, the one that didn't belong on a stranger's face. He opened his mouth as though he was about to say something, then closed it again. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" "No," I said. "Thank you, Daniel." He hesitated one moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded and walked away. Ashley set her phone face down on the table and folded her hands. She looked at Maeve, then at Connor. Then she raised her hand and caught Daniel's eye across the room. "Excuse me," she called. "We'll need the check when you're ready." She looked at Connor. He nodded. Then she looked back toward Daniel, and her voice lifted just slightly, just enough to carry to the tables on either side of us, and she said it. "And split it. Please. My mother-in-law won't be needing one. We're not paying for her." Maeve's hands went still in her lap. Connor looked down at the table. I set my water glass down very carefully. The way you set something down when you know that what comes next will require both hands. For 21 years, I kept a secret. Not because I was ashamed of it. Because some gifts lose their meaning the moment you announce them. My father understood that. He gave me a tie and a coffee can and never told a soul. I understood it too. In March of 2003, 6 weeks after the warehouse fire on Roxbury Street that cost me the use of 2 fingers on my right hand and gave the city grounds for a settlement, I sat in Eamon Brady's office on School Street and signed papers transferring $2,100,000 into the Boston Firefighters Fallen Heroes Trust Fund. 12 families. 12 men who had gone into fires and not come back out. Eamon set down his pen and looked at me across the desk. "Patty, are you certain?" "Every cent," I said. "You could keep a portion. No one would." "Every cent." "Eamon." He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his pen and witnessed my signature without another word. That was why I trusted him. He knew when a man had made up his mind. I thought about those 12 families often over the years. Margaret Chen, 34 years old, 3 kids under 10, whose husband Bobby had been my lieutenant for 6 years. The Kowalski family from Dorchester. The 2 DeMarco brothers who had both signed up in the same year and somehow ended up assigned to the same station, which everyone said was a bad idea and which turned out to be worse than that. And Rosa Reyes, 28 years old. A son named Daniel who was not yet 2. I thought about Daniel Reyes more than the others, though I couldn't have said exactly why. Maybe because he was so young when it happened that he would grow up with no memory of his father at all. Just stories. Just a photograph on a shelf somewhere. Just the shape of an absence where a man should have been. Every month for 5 years I put cash in an envelope and mailed it to Rosa Reyes at the address Eamon had on file. No name. No return address. Boston Fire Station 10 postmark. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. But it was what I had. I came back to the present slowly. The restaurant had not changed around me, same crystal, same candlelight, same careful murmur of other people's evenings, but something in the quality of the air at our table had shifted since Ashley's words landed. The couple at the next table had stopped talking. I could see a phone rising at the table beyond them, unhurried, like a tide coming in. Maeve had not moved. She sat with her hands in her lap, looking at the harbor, her face arranged into the particular stillness she had perfected over 48 years of absorbing things that should not have had to be absorbed. Connor stared at the tablecloth. Ashley picked up her wine glass. I thought about the second thing in that November envelope. The photograph of a small girl with dark eyes outside an apartment building in Cambridge. eyes that belonged to someone else entirely. A child, perhaps 4 years old, who had never been mentioned. Not once. In 6 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits and carefully worded phone calls, I thought about the first thing, the email chain. The name Chen appearing in an address I didn't recognize. The words I had read 3 times before I believed them. The Fitzgerald woman needs to drop further on the list. Maeve's maiden name was Fitzgerald, and I thought about the third thing, the 12 handwritten lines. My son, walking 2 blocks in November, ran to a FedEx office on Boylston Street at 2 in the morning to mail a letter to his father because he was too afraid to make a phone call his wife might overhear. Dad, I'm drowning. I reached under the table and found Maeve's hand. She turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes asked a question she already knew the answer to. I gave her hand one squeeze. She squeezed back barely any strength in her grip, but it was there. Then I reached into my jacket and took out the briefcase from where I had set it against my chair leg, and I set it on the table. Ashley looked at it. What is that? I didn't answer. Daniel was moving toward us from across the room. He had seen me set the briefcase down. He slowed his pace, not obviously, just a fraction, and his face arranged itself into something careful and watchful. Tony Mancini appeared at the far side of the room. He had been there all evening, moving quietly through his restaurant the way a man moves through a place he has built and knows completely. Now he stopped moving. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him and watched our table. I unclasped the briefcase. I reached inside and removed the first document, a certificate on heavy paper. Embossed seal at the top. Dated March 15th, 2003. I set it flat on the table where everyone at our table could read it. Ashley leaned forward. Her expression shifted. Connor looked up from the tablecloth for the first time in several minutes. This, I said, is the Boston Firefighters Fallen Heroes Trust Fund Certificate of Transfer. $2,100,000. Signed over in full on March 15th, 2003. I looked at my son. Every cent the city gave me for this. I held up my right hand briefly, the 2 fingers that didn't close all the way anymore. 12 families. I kept nothing. Connor's face had gone very still. I reached back into the briefcase and removed 12 photographs. I set them on the table one at a time, the way you deal cards, slowly enough that each face could be seen. 12 faces, 12 men, 12 families left behind. These are the men whose families received that money, I said. Connor looked at the photographs. His jaw worked silently. Then, Dad, you gave it all away. All of it. Every penny, son. I looked at Ashley. Because that's what the job means. You take care of your own. I paused. Something you would know nothing about. Ashley opened her mouth. I reached into the briefcase one more time. But that's not why we're here tonight. I placed the small white envelope on the table in front of Connor. The postmark was clearly visible in the candlelight. November 14th, 2023. Connor looked at the envelope. His face went the color of ash. Sam Riley handed me 41 pages on Ashley Caldwell 3 weeks after I called him. I read them over 3 nights at the kitchen table after Maeve went to sleep. I made coffee each night and let it go cold. By the 3rd night, I understood exactly what kind of woman my son had married, and exactly how long she had been planning it. Ashley Caldwell. Born 1985 in Greenwich, Connecticut. Father a currency trader who lost everything in 2008 and spent the next decade pretending he hadn't. Mother a woman who wore the right clothes to the right clubs and called it a life. Ashley had grown up learning that appearance was the only currency that mattered, and she had learned it thoroughly. Boston University, 2004 through 2012. Dental school. Graduated near the top of her class. Driven. Sam's contact said. Focused. The kind of student who chose her friends the way other people choose investments, based entirely on projected returns. In 2008, in her second year of dental school, she met a first-year cardiology resident named Marcus Chen. They were together 3 years. Then they weren't. Then, apparently, they were again, though by that point Ashley had moved on to other things. Other people. She had met Connor at a fundraiser in 2016. They were married in 2018. A wedding in Newport that cost more than our house, which Connor paid for with money I had assumed came from his business. I had not asked where it came from. That was my failure, one of several. In 2019, 1 year into the marriage, Ashley resumed contact with Marcus Chen. Sam had phone records, email threads, a photograph taken outside a restaurant in Cambridge in November of that year. They were not having dinner as old friends. In March of 2020, a girl named Lily was born at Massachusetts General Hospital. Father listed on the birth certificate Marcus Chen, M.D. Mother Ashley Caldwell. Connor's name appeared nowhere on that document. Every month for 38 months, $3,200 moved from the joint checking account Ashley shared with my son to a property management company in Cambridge. The company managed one building. The building contained one apartment. The apartment was occupied by Marcus Chen and a 4-year-old girl with dark eyes. Connor had never asked about the transfer. Sam thought Ashley had categorized it in their accounting software under a label Connor wouldn't question. He had been right not to question it, because by that point, based on the lab results Sam had arranged through a contact at a private clinic, Connor had been medicated into a state of careful, compliant fog for the better part of 8 months. And then there was the other thing, the thing that made everything else look minor by comparison. Maeve had been number 47 on the cardiac transplant list at Brigham and Women's Hospital as of September of 2023. By December, she was number 93. The physician overseeing her case file during those 3 months was a consulting cardiologist named Marcus Chen. I had read that page 4 times. Each time I finished reading it, I set it face down on the table and sat very still for a while before I could pick it up again. Eamon Brady had looked at the same page in his office in January and said nothing for nearly 2 minutes. Then he said, "Patty, this is federal, wire fraud, elder abuse, medical fraud. We take this to the FBI and we time it carefully." "We time it," I said, "when Maeve is in the room." He had looked at me for a long moment. "All right," he said. "When Maeve is in the room." Connor was still looking at the envelope. His face had not recovered its color. Across the table, Ashley had set down her wine glass and was watching me with an expression I recognized from Sam's file, the expression of someone rapidly recalculating. "What is that?" she asked. Her voice was still controlled. "Barely." "You'll see," I said. I looked at my son. He was looking at the postmark, November 14, 2023, with the expression of a man who has just understood something that reframes everything that came before it. "Connor," I said quietly, "do you recognize the handwriting on that envelope?" He looked up at me. Something moved across his face, a crack in the surface. The first real one all evening. "Dad." "It's all right, son." I kept my voice even. Just tell me if you recognize it. A long pause. The table beside us had gone completely silent. 2 phones were up now. Then 3. It's mine, Connor said. Ashley's hand moved toward the envelope. I put mine over it first. I haven't finished, I said. I held the envelope in place and looked across the table at my daughter-in-law, at Ashley Caldwell from Greenwich, Connecticut, who had chosen my son the way a contractor chooses a building to demolish. Carefully and with a clear picture of what she intended to take when it came down. And I waited for the room to go a little quieter still before I opened it. There are moments in a man's life when the world goes very quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a building collapses when the structure has already made its decision, and the only thing left is the falling. I had been in 3 buildings when they made that decision. I knew what the silence felt like. I opened the envelope. Connor's letter was 3/4 of a page, handwritten on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. I did not read it aloud yet. I set it face down on the table beside the trust fund certificate and the 12 photographs, and I looked at my son. 12 lines, I said. You wrote 12 lines and walked 2 blocks in the rain at 2 in the morning to mail them because you were afraid to use the phone in your own home. Connor said nothing. Trick, I want you to know that I read those 12 lines every day for 7 months. Every single day. Ashley's voice came in sharp and controlled. This is not the appropriate place to air, family. I stood up. I did it slowly, deliberately. The way I had stood up in burning rooms for 38 years, not fast, not dramatic. Just the steady rising of a man who has decided that sitting is no longer an option. The chair legs scraped the floor. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a radio signal finding its frequency. The tables around us went quiet one by one. I have stood at the funerals of 11 men I called brothers. I have stood in hospital hallways at 3 in the morning delivering news that could not be softened. I knew how to stand up. I knew what it cost, and I knew what it meant. I reached into the briefcase and removed the trust fund certificate. I held it at an angle so that the embossed seal caught the light. This is what I did with the money the city gave me for these. I held up my right hand briefly, the 2 fingers that didn't fully close. $2,100,000. Every cent. 12 families. I set the certificate on the table. Then I took out the photographs. All 12. I placed them one at a time, not quickly, not slowly, just steadily across the white tablecloth. Each one face up. Each one visible. The restaurant was almost completely silent now. I could hear, very faintly, the sound of the harbor. 12 faces, 12 men, 12 fathers and husbands and sons. These are the people whose families received that money, I said. I drove a 15-year-old Honda while my son drove a BMW. I worked night shifts driving strangers across this city while my wife rationed her medication because we couldn't afford her full prescription. And I did not touch $1 of that fund, Ashley said. That was 20 years ago. You can't possibly expect. I'm not finished. 2 words. Quiet as everything else I had said tonight. But something in them stopped her completely. Connor was looking at the photographs. His face had gone through several things in the past: minute shock, confusion, something that might have been the beginning of grief. He picked up one of the photographs and looked at it for a long moment. A man in his late 30s, dark eyes, wide smile, standing in front of a fire truck with his arm around a woman who was laughing at whatever he'd just said. "Dad," Connor said. His voice was barely audible. "You gave all of it away." You kept nothing. Every penny, son. I looked at him steadily. Because that's what the job means. You take care of your own. I let that sit for a moment. Then I looked at Ashley. Something you would know nothing about. She opened her mouth. Her eyes had changed. The calculation was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Some layer of certainty that had been load-bearing. This has nothing to do with tonight, she said. You're right, I said. It doesn't. I reached into the briefcase one final time and removed the small white envelope. Connor's handwriting on the front. The postmark clear and legible under the restaurant's chandelier light. November 14, 2023. I set it on the table directly in front of my son. Connor looked at it the way you look at something you buried and hoped would stay buried. His hands were very still, now the medicated stillness Ashley had arranged for him. The stillness that I was going to have to help him find his way back from. I think, I said quietly. You recognize the handwriting. Around us, the restaurant had become something different from what it had been 20 minutes ago. 40, 50 people no longer eating. Phones raised. The couple beside us holding hands without seeming to realize it. Daniel standing near the service station with a water pitcher he had forgotten to use. Watching with those dark eyes that had been watching me all evening. Tony Mancini had not moved from his position near the far wall. Nobody had moved. Connor looked up from the envelope. He looked at me. Then he looked at his mother, sitting very straight in her chair, her soup cold in front of her. Her hands folded in her lap with the particular dignity of a woman who has been absorbing things all her life that should not have had to be absorbed. It's mine, he said. I wrote it. Ashley's hand shot across the table toward the envelope. I covered it with my palm. I haven't finished, I said. My son had written that letter at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. I know because Sam Riley traced the postmark to a FedEx office on Boylston Street, 2 blocks from the apartment Ashley had chosen for them. Connor had walked there in the rain, alone. He had addressed the envelope by hand, paid cash, and walked back in the same rain he had come in. A man who is truly broken does not do that. A man who is truly lost does not reach for his father. I opened the envelope and removed the letter. 1 page, handwritten on lined paper. I did not look at Ashley. I did not look at the phones. I looked at my son, and I read, Dad, I'm drowning. I don't know who I am anymore. She controls everything, the money, the schedule, my medication. I think she's been changing my prescriptions. I'm scared. Please help me. Don't tell her you got this. I love you. Connor. The restaurant was so quiet, I could hear the candle on our table burning. Ashley stood up. That is, he was going through a difficult period. He wasn't thinking clearly. You cannot stand there and read a private, I wrote it. 2 words. Connor's voice. Quiet and absolutely certain. Ashley turned to look at him. I wrote every word of it. He said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at me. And something in his face had changed. Something behind the medicated stillness had cracked open. And what was coming through the crack was not anger. Not yet. It was something older than anger. Something that had been waiting a long time. Connor. Ashley's voice shifted into a register I recognized from Sam's notes. The careful, reasonable tone she used when the ground was moving. Sweetheart, you were depressed. You weren't sleeping. You said yourself that your memory was Sam Riley, I said. I reached into the briefcase and removed a document. Not the letter. Something else. 8 pages, bound with a binder clip. The header of a private medical laboratory in Quincy across the top. Sam Riley arranged a hair follicle analysis in January of this year, I said. The sample was Connor's. The results took 3 weeks. I set the document on the table. Benzodiazepine levels consistent with 8 months of daily ingestion. The report notes that the concentration is not consistent with any prescription Connor currently holds. The source, according to the toxicologist, was external. Connor picked up the document. He read the first page, then the second. His hands were very still, the medicated stillness that had bothered me all evening, but his eyes were moving fast. The way eyes move when a mind is working hard and fast and has suddenly been given the fuel it needed. He set the document down. He looked at his water glass, the one Ashley had filled from the wine bottle while he was in the restroom. Something crossed his face that I will not try to describe, because I do not have the words for what it looks like when a man understands, all at once, the full dimensions of what has been done to him. How long? He said. Ashley said nothing. Ashley. His voice was very quiet, the quietest I had heard it all evening. How long have you been doing this to me? It was not a question. It had the flatness of a statement of fact that a man is reading aloud to confirm he has understood it correctly. She opened her mouth, closed it. 8 months, Connor said. According to this, 8 months. He looked at the glass again. And tonight, the table beside us had gone completely still. I counted 40 phones without trying. Daniel had set down the water pitcher. Tony had taken 3 steps closer to our table, moving quietly through the frozen room. Connor stood up. He was steadier than I expected, given the circumstances. He pushed back his chair, came around the table, and stopped beside my chair and Maeve's. He stood there for a moment, 44 years old, a man finding his footing in a world that had been tilted under him for the better part of a year, and then he looked at Maeve. Mom. His voice broke on the single syllable. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. Maeve reached up and put her hand on his face, her cold, trembling hand on his cheek. I know you didn't, baby, she said. I know. He covered her hand with his and held it there. I looked at my son standing beside his mother, and I thought about the boy who used to wait on the front steps of our house on K Street for the sound of the Honda coming down the street after my night shifts. He would be there at 6 in the morning in his pajamas, just waiting, just making sure I had come back. That boy had never left. He had just been buried under 8 months of someone else's chemistry. Son, I said quietly. There's more. Connor straightened. He did not go back to his chair. He stayed where he was, beside his mother, and nodded once. Ashley Caldwell had been planning this for 6 years. I want you to understand that. Not months. 6 years. She had chosen my son the way a contractor chooses a building to demolish carefully, methodically, with a very clear picture of what she intended to take when it came down. I reached into the briefcase and removed the next folder. Inside were photographs. I placed the first one on the table, Ashley and a man I recognized from Sam's file outside a restaurant in Cambridge. November of 2021. Close enough to remove any ambiguity about what kind of dinner it was. Ashley looked at the photograph. She said nothing. I placed the second photograph. Same two people, different location. March of 2022. Then the third, February of 2023. Connor looked at the photographs with the careful, methodical attention of a man who is making himself look at something he would very much prefer not to see. His face was controlled in the way that costs something to maintain. I removed the next document, a birth certificate, issued by Massachusetts General Hospital, dated March 15th, 2020. Lily, I said. 4 years old. Father listed as Marcus Chen, M.D. I set it on the table. Mother listed as Ashley Caldwell. The room had been quiet before. Now it was something beyond quiet, the specific silence of 60 people collectively holding their breath. Connor picked up the birth certificate. He read it once, set it down, picked it up and read it again, set it down very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are not entirely reliable. I removed the bank statements next. 38 months of transfers. $3,200 per month. Joint account to a property management company in Cambridge. 38 months, I said. $121,600. To an apartment occupied by Dr. Marcus Chen and a 4-year-old girl. Ashley's lawyer voice had come back controlled, reasonable. The voice of someone recalibrating in real time. These documents you have no context for what you're looking at. There are explanations for all of, I removed the email chain. I had saved this one. I had known from the first time I read it, sitting at the kitchen table at 2 a.m, that this was the one that would matter most. Not because of what it revealed about Ashley, everything else had already revealed that, but because of what it revealed about what had been done to Maeve. I set it on the table and I read it aloud, from Ashley Caldwell to Marcus Chen. October 14th, 2023. Quote, the Fitzgerald woman is at 47 on the list. I need her at 93 or lower before December. Use the cardiac enzyme numbers from the October workup. Lily's winter recital is the 14th, by the way. Don't forget. End quote. The silence after I stopped reading was the deepest of the evening. Connor had gone absolutely still. He was looking at the email printout on the table in front of him, and I watched him read it. And I watched him read it again, and I watched him arrive at the part that I knew would be the hardest part. The Fitzgerald woman, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. The Fitzgerald woman, he said again, and this time he looked up at Ashley, and the look on his face was something I had not seen on my son's face in 44 years of knowing him. You called my mother the Fitzgerald woman, Ashley said. Connor, she has a name. His voice was still quiet, still controlled. But underneath the control, something had ignited, slow and certain, the way seasoned wood catches not fast, not dramatic, but absolute. Her name is Maeve Fitzgerald O'Sullivan. She taught 3rd grade at St. Gregory's for 31 years. She made Irish stew every Sunday. She sent you a birthday card every single year. Ashley, even after you stopped thanking her for them. Ashley's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Connor looked at his mother. Maeve had her eyes closed. One tear had run the full length of her cheek and dropped from her jaw. She had not lifted a hand to stop it. She was sitting perfectly straight in her chair, the way she had sat straight all evening. And she looked despite everything, despite the blue dress from the thrift sale and the hospital bracelet, and the cold soup like the most dignified person in the room. Which she was. Mom, Connor said. His voice broke cleanly on the word. the way a bone breaks a single clean fracture, not a crumble. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Maeve opened her eyes. She looked at her son. She reached out and took his hand in both of hers and held it the way she had held him when he was small and the world had been too large and too loud. I know, she said. I know, baby. I looked at Ashley. For the first time all evening, she had nothing. No smile, no calculation, no voice. She was looking at Connor and Maeve, and something in her face had gone out. The way a light goes out, abruptly and completely. I reached into the briefcase one final time. She looked at what I was removing, and her face changed again from empty to something that might, in a different woman, have been fear. What is that? She said. The last piece, I said, and behind her, near the far wall. Tony Mancini nodded to the two men beside him. Tony Mancini had worked the Roxbury warehouse fire in June of 2003. He had been a Boston police detective for 11 years by then, assigned to the arson unit, and he had filed the incident report on the night of June 12th, the same night Miguel Reyes died, and I came out of that building with 2 fingers that didn't work anymore, and smoke in my lungs that took 6 months to clear. He had known, from that report, what Patrick O'Sullivan had done during that fire, and what he had done with the settlement money afterward. He had kept that secret for 21 years. Tonight he had decided he was done keeping it. He crossed the room toward our table with the unhurried authority of a man who spent 22 years walking into situations that needed managing. The 2 men beside him followed Agent Sarah Kowalski and Agent James Park, FBI Boston Field Office, whom Eamon Brady had contacted in January and who had been building their case quietly ever since. Tony stopped at our table. He looked at Ashley, Ms. Caldwell. His voice carried without effort to every corner of the room. Dr. Marcus Chen was arrested at St. Elizabeth's Medical Center this afternoon at 4:30. He has been cooperative. Ashley stood up. The movement was fast, the first uncontrolled thing she had done all evening. She took one step, and Agent Kowalski was simply there, positioned without drama, a hand raised in a gesture that was not quite a block, but left no ambiguity about what it meant. Ashley stopped. Connor watched this. He did not move to help her. He did not look away. Tony turned to face the room. I had not asked him to do what he did next. We had not discussed it. But I had known Tony Mancini for 21 years, and I understood. Watching him turn to face 60 strangers in a restaurant on Father's Day, that some things a man does not need to be asked. My name is Antonio Mancini, he said. I was a Boston police detective for 22 years. I worked the Roxbury warehouse fire in June of 2003. I was there when Patrick O'Sullivan carried Miguel Reyes out of that building and held his hand until the end. He paused. True, I also know what this man did with every cent of the settlement the city gave him. I have known for 21 years. And I know what his daughter-in-law told a waiter tonight about whether his wife was worth the cost of a bowl of soup. The applause started at a table near the window. 1 person, then 2, then the whole table, then the table beside it. It spread across the room the way fire spreads across a dry floor, not explosively, but with a kind of inevitability that, once you see it starting, you understand is not going to stop. I stood at the center of it and felt nothing grand. Just tired. Just grateful. Just the specific relief of a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Tony reached into his jacket. He produced an envelope, thick, letter-sized, and held it out to me. From the restaurant, he said. And from me. I took it. I did not open it. He reached into his jacket again and produced a small laminated card. He pressed it into my hand. Free meals. For life. For me and Maeve. Embossed with the mariner's crest. Signed by Tony at the bottom in the same handwriting I recognized from 21 years of Christmas cards. It's not enough, he said. It's not close to enough. But it's what I have tonight. I looked at him. At this man who had filed an incident report in 2003 and kept a secret for 2 decades out of some understanding that the secret belonged to me and not to him. Tony, there's one more thing. He turned and looked across the room to where Daniel Reyes was standing near the service station, still holding the water pitcher he had forgotten to use, watching our table with those dark eyes that had been watching me all evening. I think that young man, Tony said quietly, has been waiting to say something since you walked in. The applause had not stopped. If anything, it had grown more people standing now, the sound filling the high-ceilinged room, bouncing off the glass that looked out over the dark harbor. I looked at Daniel. He was already moving. He set the water pitcher down on the service station with the careful deliberateness of someone setting aside the thing they have been using to keep their hands busy while they worked up the courage to do something else. He untied his apron. He folded it once and set it beside the pitcher. Then he walked toward our table. The room watched him come. The applause faded gradually as he crossed the floor, not because people stopped clapping, but because something in the quality of his movement made them understand that what was coming next required quiet. He stopped in front of me. He was 22 years old. He had his father's eyes. I had last seen those eyes on June 12th, 2003, in a burning building on Roxbury Street, looking up at me from a face covered in ash, asking me without words to tell him the thing he already knew. Mr. O'Sullivan, Daniel said. His voice was steady. I did not know how. My father was Miguel Reyes. In 38 years of firefighting, I lost 11 men. I remember every one of their faces, the way each of them looked on ordinary days drinking bad coffee at the station, arguing about baseball, falling asleep in the rec room with their boots still on. I remember them on the hard days too, but I try not to go there often. The ordinary days are the ones worth keeping. Miguel Reyes had the darkest eyes I had ever seen. He was 43 years old. He had a laugh that you could hear from 2 rooms away and a singing voice that his crew teased him about constantly, and that was, in fact, genuinely beautiful. He was singing when the ceiling came down. I stood in front of his son, and I did not look away. I know, I said. I know who you are. Daniel nodded once. He had the posture of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times and was now discovering that the rehearsal had not fully prepared him for the actual thing. The report said you went back in 3 times, he said. After the roof started to go. I did. The 4th time you couldn't get him out. No. The word cost something. It always had. I couldn't get him out. But you stayed with him. Yes. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Around us, the restaurant had gone so still that I could hear the faint sound of a boat horn somewhere out on the harbor. My mother told me, he said. She said you held his hand. She said you talked to him. She said you told him his family would be okay. I said nothing. I remembered. And then every month for 5 years. Daniel continued, his voice steady in the way that voices are steady when a person is working very hard to keep them that way. An envelope came to our apartment in Jamaica Plain. No name, no return address, just cash. Enough to cover our rent, enough for groceries, enough to keep us from losing the apartment while my mother figured out how to rebuild. He paused. How did you find us? Eamon Brady had the address on file, from the fund paperwork. Daniel nodded slowly, as though this answered something he had wondered about for a long time. Mom kept every envelope. She kept them in a shoebox under her bed. When I was old enough, she showed them to me and told me about the man who sent them. He looked at my left hand, at the scar that ran from my knuckles to my wrist burn tissue, silver and smooth, from the fourth time I went into that building. She said I would know him by the scar on his left hand. The applause had faded entirely now. 60 people stood or sat in complete silence, watching a 22-year-old waiter stand in front of a 70-year-old retired firefighter and say the things that had been waiting 21 years to be said. Daniel reached into the pocket of his uniform shirt. He removed a photograph, worn at the edges, and held it out to me. A man in his early 40s, dark eyes, wide smile, standing in front of a fire truck, his arm around a woman who was laughing at something he'd just said. A toddler on his hip, maybe 18 months old, squinting into the sun. Miguel, Rosa, and Daniel himself, 21 years ago, before he would have any memory of what came next. I took the photograph. I looked at it for a long time. He was singing, I said finally. My voice was not entirely steady. A song in Spanish. I didn't know the words. He wasn't afraid. I looked up at Daniel. He asked me to tell his family he loved them. I never found a way to reach you directly. I'm sorry for that. You found a way, Daniel said. Every month for 5 years. He dropped to one knee. It was a simple, deliberate movement, the kind of gesture that belongs to an older world, one where such things were still done without embarrassment. He went down on one knee on the floor of the Mariner restaurant on Father's Day, in front of 60 witnesses and 40 phones, and he looked up at me. You couldn't save my father, he said, but you saved us. You saved me. I reached down and took his arm and brought him to his feet. And then I held on. My shoulders shook. I could not stop them. 38 years of standing steady in rooms where the walls were on fire, and I could not stop my shoulders from shaking in a restaurant on Father's Day when a 22-year-old boy with his father's eyes told me I had done something right. He was a good man. I managed. He died like a man who had done everything right with his life. Daniel held on and said nothing. When I finally let go, I checked my watch from reflex, an old habit. Timing everything. Knowing always how many minutes you had before conditions changed. 8:41 p.m. My phone buzzed in my inside jacket pocket. I already knew what it would say. I had been waiting for it since 3 that afternoon. I took it out and read it. Hart landed at Logan. 8:38 p.m. Brigham team is ready. You have until 12:47 a.m. Amen. I read it once. Then I handed it to Maeve. She read it. Her hands were trembling not from illness. Not this time. She pressed the phone against her chest for a moment. Her eyes closed, her lips moving slightly. I looked at Connor. He was watching his mother. We need to go, I said. Brigham and Women's. They have a heart for you. Maeve. The woman at the table beside us made a sound, a short, involuntary intake of breath, and began to cry. I have been applauded once before in my life. My retirement ceremony, 2016. The guys from Station 10 stomped their boots on the concrete floor the way they always did for a man finishing his last shift, and Chief Hannigan shook my hand and said I was the best man he had ever had the privilege of serving beside. And I stood there in my dress uniform and felt the particular, uncomfortable pride of a man who does not know what to do with being seen. That was the proudest moment of my professional life. Until this one. It started at the table by the window, one person standing, then two, then the whole table rising together without coordination, without anyone deciding, just the spontaneous uprighting of people who have witnessed something and need to be on their feet for it. It spread to the next table, then the next, moving across the room like a tide coming in, unhurried and unstoppable. I stood at the center of it and felt, of all things, very calm. Not the calm of a man who has gotten what he wanted. The calm of a man who has done what needed doing and can now put it down. Tony Mancini did not applaud. He stood near the far wall with his hands clasped in front of him and his chin slightly raised. The way a man stands at attention when he is paying a specific kind of respect. I had seen that posture before, in uniform, at funerals. It meant something different here, in a restaurant, on a Father's Day evening. And it meant exactly the same thing. Daniel stood beside me. He had not moved back to his position near the service station. He stayed where he was, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched mine, and I understood that he was not going to move until I did. Connor was on the other side of Maeve's chair. He had one hand on her shoulder. She had reached up and covered his hand with hers, and they stayed that way, mother and son, connected by 44 years and one terrible year and one evening that had burned through everything in between. I looked at my son over Maeve's head. "Come with us," I said. The applause made it necessary to speak slightly louder than I would have liked, but not loud. "To the hospital." Connor looked at me. Something moved across his face, the ghost of the question he was too proud or too ashamed to ask directly. I answered it before he could form the words. "You're my son," I said. "I'll always want you there." He nodded. Once. Small and certain, I reached down and helped Maeve to her feet. She rose slowly, steadying herself with one hand on the table, and then she straightened to her full height, 5 feet 4 inches, 68 years old, a woman who had been ironing her dress collar since 7 that morning and was still, somehow, the most composed person in the room. The crowd parted without being asked. Tables shifted, chairs moved, people stepped aside to open a path from our corner to the door. They did it quietly and without ceremony, the way people move in church, because they understood instinctively what kind of moment this was. Daniel walked with us to the door. Not behind us, not a head beside us, at my left shoulder, where a younger man walks with an older one when he wants to make clear that he would catch him if he fell. I was not going to fall, but I was grateful for it nonetheless. At the door I stopped and turned back once. The room was still standing, all of it. 60 people on their feet in the warm light of the Mariner on Father's Day, their dinners going cold, their wine glasses untouched, watching 3 people walk toward a door and a car and a hospital across the city. Ashley sat between Agent Kowalski and Agent Park, with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the tablecloth. She did not look up. The folder of documents lay spread across the white linen where I had left it. Evidence of everything that had been done and everything it had cost. I did not pick it up. Eamon would handle it. That was what Eamon was for. I looked at Tony. He gave me a single nod. I looked at Daniel. "Thank you," I said. He shook his head slightly, the gesture of someone for whom thanks is not the right word for what has passed between two people. I understood. I let it go. Then we walked out. The Boston night air hit my face like cold water, clean and sharp off the harbor. The particular smell of the city at this hour. Diesel and salt and something green from the parks inland. Maeve breathed it in deeply beside me. "It's over," she said quietly. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me her full weight, which was not much, which was less than it had been a year ago, and I held her up the way I had been holding her up for 48 years. "It's over," I said. Connor was already at the Honda, holding the rear door open. He was not looking at us. He was looking at the ground, giving us the moment, the way he had always known instinctively how to give people what they needed, even before he knew the words for it. That boy had never left. I guided Maeve to the passenger side. I got her settled. I closed her door carefully, the way you close the door of something precious. Then I walked around to the driver's side and got in. Connor pulled his door shut behind him. The three of us sat in the old Honda in the parking lot of the Mariner, the grinding transmission, the cracked dashboard, the rearview mirror held on with a strip of electrical tape, and for a moment nobody said anything at all. I put the key in the ignition. 4 hours, I said. I shifted into drive. The Honda made that grinding noise when I shifted into drive. The transmission. I had been ignoring it for 8 months because we could not afford to fix it, and because the car still ran, and because there was always something that needed the money more. Tonight it sounded like music. Tonight it sounded like the most reliable thing in the world. We drove in silence for the first several minutes. Commonwealth Avenue unrolled ahead of us. The city lit up on both sides, restaurants still full. Couples on the sidewalks. The ordinary ongoing business of a Saturday night in June. Father's Day. Out there, in all those lit windows. Fathers were being handed cards and bad neckties and breakfasts that had gone cold. Ordinary Father's Days. The kind I would have given a great deal for. Once. Connor spoke first. He was looking out the rear window at the city moving past, and his voice when it came was quiet and careful, the voice of a man choosing his words with the attention they deserved. "How long have you known about Ashley and the doctor?" 7 months, I said. "And you waited." "I waited until your mother could be in the room when the truth came out." I kept my eyes on the road. She deserved to hear it herself. Not from a phone call, not from a letter. In the room, so she could see their faces. A long silence. Fenway Park passed on our right. Dark now, the lights off. "The money," Connor said. "The $2 million. You really gave all of it away." "Every cent. All this time I thought..." He stopped. Started again. "I assumed you had kept some of it, invested it. I thought that was why you seemed I thought you were comfortable. I never asked because I assumed." "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that for a moment. The honest answer, the one I had arrived at after many nights of considering it, was not a comfortable one, because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I said, "I wanted you to be free to build your own life without the weight of what I had done with mine pressing down on it." I paused. "That was a mistake. I understand that now. Silence has a cost I didn't account for." Connor said nothing for a while. Mission Hill passed on our left. We were getting close. Then he made a sound that was not quite a word, a short, broken exhalation, and I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that he was crying. Not quietly, not the contained, dignified tears of a man maintaining composure. Really crying. The kind of crying that has been stored up and compressed for a long time, and has finally found the pressure point past which it cannot be held. He was not covering his face. He was just sitting there in the back seat of the old Honda, letting it happen. I looked at the road. I gave him that. Maeve turned in her seat. She looked at her son for a long moment, at this man she had carried and raised and watched drift and was now watching find his way back, and when she spoke, her voice was the voice she had used when he was small and the world was too large. Connor Patrick O'Sullivan. He looked at her. You are your father's son, not because of his blood, because of his heart. I have watched you every year on Father's Day look at him like he hung the moon. She reached back between the seats and took his hand. That boy never left. I know he didn't. He was just buried for a while. I got lost. Mom, his voice was raw. I got so lost. I stopped recognizing myself. I know you did. I should have called more. I should have asked how you were. I should have... You found your way back, Maeve said. Tonight you found your way back. That's what matters. That is the only thing that matters. He held her hand with both of his and did not say anything else. I drove. The cravat, the tie, hung from the rearview mirror where I had looped it when I got in. The way my father used to hang things from rearview mirrors. The navy blue with the thin gold stripe moved slightly with the motion of the car, catching the light from passing street lamps. I had not planned to hang it there. It had simply seemed like the right place for it on a night like this one. I thought about my father, about Sean O'Sullivan, who had died in a fire in 1972 at the age of 41, who had left a tie and a coffee can with a note that took 52 years to fully understand. I thought about Thomas Fitzgerald, who had died in the same fire on the same night, and whose daughter I had loved for 48 years, and whose granddaughter, if Maeve's surgery succeeded, if the heart held, if we were given more time, we might yet see born. Brigham and Women's Hospital appeared ahead, white and gold against the dark sky, every window lit. I pulled into the entrance lane and stopped. I looked at the building, then I looked at the tie. Dad, I said quietly. Not to Connor, not to Maeve, to the man in the coffee can. I think I fought that fire okay. The surgery lasted 6 hours and 41 minutes. I know because I counted every one of them. The waiting room on the 4th floor of Brigham and Women's was the kind of room designed to be endured rather than occupied plastic chairs bolted to the floor in rows. Fluorescent lighting that turned everyone the same shade of pale, a vending machine in the corner that accepted dollar bills and returned them with the randomness of a man who has stopped caring. I bought 2 coffees from it at 10:15, drank one, let the other go cold. Connor sat beside me. We did not talk much. There are situations that language is not built for, and waiting rooms at 10:30 on the night your mother is having her chest opened are among them. We sat in the particular silence of 2 men who have said most of what needed saying and are now simply present for each other in the way that presence, sometimes, is the only honest thing left. At 11:30, Eamon Brady came through the door. He was 71 years old, white-haired, wearing a coat over what I suspected were his pajamas. Because I had called him at 9:45 and told him to come, and Eamon Brady had never in 40 years of friendship asked me to repeat a request. He shook my hand. He shook Connor's hand and held it a beat longer than necessary and looked at my son with the directness of a man who has known him since he was 8 years old and has some things he needs Connor to understand. Your father, Eamon said, has been protecting you for a very long time. It's time to start protecting yourself. Connor nodded, one small, serious nod, the nod of a man making a note he intends to keep. Eamon sat down on my other side and we waited together. At 1:15 in the morning, the door opened and Daniel Reyes came in. He was still in his waiter's uniform. He had his apron in one hand, folded into a square, and he was carrying 2 cups of coffee from a shop somewhere that was not the vending machine. He stopped in the doorway and looked at us with the expression of someone who has made a decision and is not going to apologize for it. I got off shift, he said. I didn't want you to wait alone. He sat down across from us and handed me one of the coffees. I took it. It was still warm. We talked for a while, Daniel and I, quietly, while Connor dozed in his chair and Eamon read from his phone. Daniel told me about Rosa, about the years after his father died, the 3 jobs she worked simultaneously, the way she had moved them from Jamaica Plain to Quincy when he was 7 to get him into a better school district, the sacrifices that had no name because she never named them, just made them and moved on. I told him about his father, the things I remembered from the station, the singing, the laugh, the particular way Miguel had of making everyone in a room feel that he was genuinely glad they were there, the things I remembered from that building. I had not spoken about them to anyone in 21 years, and saying them aloud to Miguel's son in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning felt like the most natural thing I had ever done. Connor woke up at some point and listened without joining in. That was all right. Some conversations are meant to be witnessed as much as heard. At 4:43 in the morning, the door opened. The surgeon was still in scrubs, mask pulled down around his neck, the particular tiredness of a man who has been doing very precise work for a very long time without stopping. He looked at me. Mr. O'Sullivan. I stood up. The surgery was successful. Your wife is stable. She's in recovery. You'll be able to see her in about an hour. I stood there for a moment. I had been waiting to hear those words for so long, through so many nights of listening to the oxygen concentrator, through so many mornings of watching Maeve's hands shake over her coffee cup, through the whole terrible arithmetic of a woman's life being rationed against what we could and could not afford, that hearing them now felt like something I needed a moment to locate myself inside. Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. Connor stood up from his chair and came around and put his arms around me the way he had not done since he was a boy. Without calculation, without self-consciousness, just the simple instinct of a son reaching for his father. I held on. At some point I became aware that Eamon was standing quietly to one side, turned slightly away, giving us the moment. He had his hand in his jacket pocket. He was doing something with whatever was in it, turning it over, holding it. I knew what it was. When Connor stepped back, I looked at Eamon. He met my eyes. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and removed the last document, the one I had told no one about, the page from the doctor's office on Tremont Street, dated March 3rd, 2024. I held it out to him. It's time, I said. Eamon took it. He unfolded it. He read it once, carefully, the way Eamon read everything. Then he looked up at me, and his eyes were red at the rims in a way I had seen only twice before in 40 years. Patty, I know, I said, but not tonight. I looked at the door behind which Maeve was breathing with a new heart. Tonight, we celebrate. Eamon folded the page. He put it in his jacket pocket. He nodded once the nod of a man accepting a request he does not like but will honor. "So, all right," he said quietly. "Not tonight." But we both knew what the page said, and we both knew that the fire was not finished with me yet. 3 weeks later, I sat on the back porch of our house on K Street. Maeve was inside, resting. The scar on her chest was still fresh, a thin vertical line, neat and deliberate, the signature of careful hands doing careful work. She tired easily. She slept more than she used to. But she was breathing on her own, without the concentrator, without the supplemental oxygen, just breathing the way a person breathes when their heart is doing what a heart is supposed to do. I sat in the old wooden chair that had been on that porch since we moved in, and I drank my coffee and I listened to the neighborhood. Early July in Dorchester, kids on the sidewalk, someone's radio through an open window, the smell of someone grilling 2 blocks over. The particular ordinary music of a place that has been lived in for a long time by people who intend to keep living in it. I had not watched the news in 3 weeks. I knew, in outline, what had happened after we left the Mariner. Eamon kept me informed of what I needed to know and nothing more, because that was what I had asked of him. Ashley faced 14 federal charges: wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit medical fraud, administration of a controlled substance without consent. She was being held without bail pending trial. Dr. Marcus Chen had surrendered his medical license the morning after his arrest and was cooperating with prosecutors in ways that would not help him as much as he hoped. Connor had filed for divorce. He was in therapy now twice a week. A woman in Cambridge who specialized in recovery from long-term psychological manipulation. He called me every morning at 8 o'clock. He had not missed a day. The video from the Mariner had been seen, according to Eamon, by somewhere north of 40 million people. CBS had called. 3 book publishers had called. A production company in Los Angeles had called about something I did not fully understand. I had not returned any of these calls and did not intend to. What happened that night was between my family and God. The rest of the world had simply been in the room. A GoFundMe campaign had raised $3.4 million for Maeve's surgery and recovery costs. I had instructed Eamon to return every dollar divided between the Boston Firefighters Fallen Heroes Trust Fund, the Brigham and Women's Cardiac Research Program, and a charity for elder abuse survivors that Agent Kowalski had recommended. It had taken some doing to arrange. People do not always understand when you try to give their generosity back, but that money had never been mine. It belonged to whatever impulse had moved 60 strangers to stand up in a restaurant on Father's Day. It deserved to go somewhere that impulse would recognize. I heard the screen door open behind me. Maeve's footsteps slow and careful, but steady. No shuffle, no hesitation at the threshold. She came out and stood for a moment, breathing the July air, her hands loose at her sides, her face turned toward the sun. Then she came and sat in the chair beside mine. The scar was visible above the neckline of her blouse. She had stopped covering it with scarves after the first week. It was part of her now. She had told me. No different from the gray in her hair, or the lines around her mouth, or the 48 years of living written across her face in ways only I could fully read. I looked at her. She looked at me. I put my hand on her chest, palm flat, over the scar. Felt the heartbeat underneath steady and even and present, the way a heartbeat should be, the way hers had not been for 2 years. "What are you doing?" she said. "Listening," I said. She put her hand over mine and left it there. We sat like that for a while. The neighborhood moved around us. The kids on the sidewalk. The radio. the grill smoke drifting over from wherever it was coming from. At 2:30 in the afternoon, the front doorbell rang. I went through the house to answer it. Daniel Reyes stood on the front step in civilian clothes jeans, a gray shirt, the relaxed posture of someone who has been invited somewhere and is not sure yet if that invitation fully extends to them. He was holding a white bakery box tied with string. Beside him stood a woman in her early 60s, with dark hair shot through with silver and a face I had been trying to picture for 21 years. She had Miguel's eyes, the same depth, the same quality of attention, the same way of looking at you that made you feel that what you said next actually mattered. She was holding a covered dish, and she smelled of something baked and warm. She looked at me for a long moment. "Mr. O'Sullivan," she said. Her voice was accented, soft. Boston over something older. "My name is Rosa. I have been wanting to say thank you for a very long time." I looked at her. At this woman who had worked 3 jobs and kept every envelope and raised Miguel Reyes's son into the kind of man who sets down a water pitcher in a restaurant and walks across a room to say what needs saying. My throat was not reliable. "Come in," I managed. "Please come in." Rosa Reyes Martinez was 61 years old, and she moved through our house on K Street like someone who understood, without being told, which rooms mattered and why. She stopped at the framed photographs in the hallway. The station photo from 2012, the whole crew from Station 10, 32 men and 4 women arranged in front of Engine 7. The retirement portrait with Chief Hannigan. The wedding photograph from 1976. Maeve and I on the steps of St. Gregory's. Her in white lace. Me in a borrowed suit that was half an inch too short in the sleeves. She looked at the wedding photograph for a long time. "How long?" she asked. 48 years, I said. She nodded slowly. The nod of someone calculating what 48 years of a thing costs and what it is worth. Maeve came in from the kitchen, and the 2 women looked at each other across the hallway, and something passed between them that I will not try to describe because it belonged to them and not to me. Maeve opened her arms. Rosa walked into them. They held each other in our hallway for a long moment. 2 women who had loved men who ran into fires, who had each paid the price that love demands, who were standing in the same narrow hallway on a July afternoon because of what those men had meant to each other in a burning building 21 years ago. Daniel and I stood a few feet back and looked at the floor and gave them the room. Rosa had brought Irish soda bread in the covered dish she had asked a neighbor to teach her the recipe. Daniel told me quietly. She had practiced it 3 times. She had wanted to bring something that meant something. We sat at the kitchen table. Rosa and Maeve and Daniel and I. Rosa's soda bread in the center, still warm. A pot of tea that Maeve had insisted on making herself standing beside it. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at the angle it always came in July, falling across the table in a long stripe that moved slowly as the hours passed. Rosa told us about the envelopes. She had kept them all, 60 of them, in a shoebox under her bed, each one in its original envelope, each one with the Station 10 postmark. She had opened every one at the kitchen table of their apartment in Jamaica Plain, alone, after Daniel was in bed. She had counted the money carefully and put it in the account she had opened specifically for it, not mixed with anything else. Kept separate. A fund she thought of in her mind as Miguel's last provision. "I used to talk to him about it," she said. "When I was counting the money, I would tell him, 'Miguel, someone is watching over us. Someone who knew you is making sure we are okay.'" She looked at her hands around her teacup. I didn't know who, but I talked to him about it. Every month for 5 years. I did not trust my voice for a moment. I looked out the window at the backyard, the garden Maeve had kept for 30 years. The roses that had come back again this summer as they always did. He would have liked knowing, I said finally, that it reached you. It reached us, Rosa said. More than you know. The doorbell rang at 3:30. Connor. He came in carrying a bag from the Italian place on Adams Street, enough food for everyone. More than enough. The particular generosity of a man who is still learning how to show up and is compensating with quantity until he figures out the calibration. He stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw Rosa and Daniel at the table. Daniel stood. The two of them looked at each other. "You're his son," Connor said. "You're his son," Daniel said back. They shook hands. Then Connor pulled Daniel into a brief, awkward hug, the hug of two men who do not know each other well, but have been connected by something large, and are trying to honor that without making a scene of it. Daniel accepted it with the grace of someone who understood exactly what it was. We ate on the back porch. All 5 of us, Maeve and Rosa in the good chairs. Connor and Daniel on the steps. Me in the old wooden chair that had been there since we moved in. The food got passed around. The conversation moved the way conversation moves when people are still learning the shape of each other, finding the edges, discovering what fits. Rosa asked Connor about his work. He told her, honestly, that he was figuring that out. She nodded as though this were a perfectly reasonable place to be at 44. Daniel told Connor about his plans to finish his degree hospitality management. Nights and weekends, the long way around. Connor said he knew someone who might be useful and took out his phone and actually meant it. The sun moved. The afternoon deepened toward evening. At some point, Daniel looked at me across the porch and asked the question he had asked before. The first time we spoke. "What will you do now, sir?" I looked at Maeve. She was laughing at something Rosa had said, a real laugh, full and unguarded. The laugh I had been listening for 2 years and had been hearing again for 3 weeks now, and still caught me every time like something unexpected and wonderful. I looked at Connor on the steps. He was showing Daniel something on his phone, leaning forward, engaged and present in a way I had not seen from him in years. I looked at the roses, at the K Street rooftops against the July sky, at the back porch of the house where I had lived for 31 years. "I think," I said, "I'll stay right here." Rosa smiled. She raised her teacup. "Good," she said. Right here is a good place to be. After Rosa and Daniel left, Connor stayed. We did not plan it. Rosa had said her goodbyes warmly and thoroughly, the way she did everything, and Daniel had hugged Maeve and shaken my hand and promised to come back the following Sunday. The door had closed behind them, and Maeve, tired in the good way that comes from an afternoon well spent, had gone inside to lie down. Connor and I were left on the back porch. He sat on the steps with his elbows on his knees, looking out at the garden. I settled back into the old wooden chair. The evening was coming and the light going gold and long, the neighborhood shifting from afternoon noise to the quieter sounds of supper time. Somewhere down the block, a screen door opened and closed. We sat like that for a while without speaking. It was a comfortable silence. Possibly the first comfortable silence we had shared in years, the kind that doesn't require filling. That means something on its own. Connor spoke first. "When I was writing that letter," he said. He was still looking at the garden. At the FedEx place. 2 in the morning. It was raining and they had the heat turned up too high. And there was one other person in there. A kid doing homework at the self-service station. He paused. I wrote it 3 times before I got it right. The first 2 times I was trying to explain everything. The third time I just said what was true. 12 lines, I said. 12 lines. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know if you'd believe me. I didn't know if I believed myself. Half the time. That's what it does to you. Makes you doubt your own reading of things. I know. You believed me anyway. You're my son, I said. I have been reading you since before you could talk. I know the difference between a man who is confused and a man who is being made to feel confused. There is a difference. It's not subtle. Once you know what to look for, he nodded slowly. Then he turned and looked at me for the first time since we had sat down. And his face in the evening light was the face of a man who has come through something and is still taking stock of what he has come through. What do I do now? He said. Not helplessly. The way a man asks a question when he genuinely wants the answer and trusts the person he's asking. You keep showing up, I said. Every day. To yourself, to therapy, to the people who matter. You keep showing up and you pay attention, and eventually the fog lifts and you find out what's underneath it. I looked at him steadily. I can tell you what I believe is underneath it. I have believed it for 44 years. He waited. A good man, I said. A man who walks 2 blocks in the rain at 2 in the morning to ask his father for help. That is not a weak man. That is not a lost man. That is a man who knows, even when everything else has been taken from him, where to reach. Connor looked at the garden for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, fully. The exhalation of a man releasing something he has been holding too long. I stood up. I went inside and came back with the coffee can. I had kept it on the top shelf of my closet since the night I took the tie out for the first time. The can itself was old. The label had faded decades ago to the point of illegibility. I sat back down and set it on my knee and opened it. The handkerchief was still inside. The note in my father's handwriting, folded to the same dimensions as the day I had found it. And the tie itself, coiled in the bottom of the can, navy blue with the thin gold stripe, smelling faintly of cedar from the closet shelf. I lifted the tie out and held it. Your grandfather Sean wore this the day he became a firefighter, I said. He left it to me in this can with a note. The note said to wear it only for the most important fire of my life. I looked at my son. I wore it last week. Connor looked at the tie. Your grandfather died in a fire in 1972, I said. He was 41 years old. He died on the same night, in the same fire, as a man named Thomas Fitzgerald. I paused. Thomas Fitzgerald was your grandmother's father, Maeve's father. Connor looked up. I didn't know that. So most people don't. We don't talk about it often. But it's the reason your mother and I found each other. 2 teenagers who had lost everything on the same night. We went to the joint funeral service and we held on and we never let go. I looked at the tie in my hands. Sean O'Sullivan and Thomas Fitzgerald died together. Their children spent 48 years together. And now I am sitting on this porch with their grandson, on an evening in July, and the circle is as complete as a circle gets. I held the tie out to Connor. He looked at it. He did not reach for it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something you understand you are not entirely ready for and are going to accept anyway. Then he took it. Not because you need to be a firefighter, I said. Because you need to know where you come from. Men who showed up. Men who kept their promises. Men who knew that the job, whatever the job is, means you take care of your own. Connor held the tie in both hands. He looked at it for a long time. I won't let you down again, Dad. Son. I leaned forward and put my hand on his shoulder. You never let me down. You got lost? There is a difference. And now you found your way back. That's the whole story. That is the only story that matters. Maeve called from inside. Her voice was warm and rested. Connor stood up. I stood up. We went inside together, into the light. I am telling you this story from the living room of our house on K Street. It is late. Maeve is asleep in the next room. I can hear her breathing steady and even and present. The way breathing sounds when the heart behind it is doing what it is supposed to do. After 48 years, I still listen for it every night before I sleep. Old habit. The kind that becomes so much a part of you that you stop noticing it until the night it almost isn't there anymore. And then you notice it for the rest of your life. I have been thinking about what to say to you, about what any of this means beyond the particular facts of one family's particular year. Here is what I have come to. The most dangerous thing in a family is not betrayal. Betrayal is loud. It announces itself. It gives you something to respond to, something to stand up against, something to name. The most dangerous thing in a family is silence, the silence that grows in the space where questions should have been asked. The unanswered phone call, the visit that didn't happen, the dinner invitation declined one too many times, the text left unread for a day, then two, then so many days that sending one feels like admitting how many days it has been. I am as guilty of this as anyone. I did not tell my son what I had sacrificed, because I did not want him to feel the weight of it. He did not tell me he was drowning, until he couldn't not tell me anymore, and even then he did it anonymously, in the rain, at 2 a.m, in a letter he wasn't sure I would believe. Maeve did not tell me how frightened she was, because she did not want to add to what I was already carrying. And I did not tell her about the page from the doctor on Tremont Street, because I could not find the words for one more thing we could not afford. We were a family of people protecting each other from the truth, and the truth nearly killed us. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, one thing I would ask you to carry away from an old man's kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, it is this. Ask the question. Ask the whatever question you have been not asking. Ask it. Call the person you have been meaning to call. Drive across town to the person you have been meaning to visit. Sit down at the table with your son, your daughter, your father, your mother, whoever it is you have been keeping the silence with, and say the thing you have been not saying. The fire does not wait. I learned that in 38 years of running into buildings. Fire does not pause while you make up your mind. It does not give you more time because you are not ready. It takes what it finds and it moves on. And the only thing that has ever stopped it is the decision made clearly and early, before the walls come down to walk toward it instead of away. Walk toward it. I am grateful. I want to say that plainly, because I think gratitude is a thing that gets said in complicated ways when it is actually very simple. I am grateful to God for 48 years with Maeve Fitzgerald, who has been the bravest person I have ever known in a life spent among brave people. I am grateful that Connor found his way back to us, that whatever remained of himself underneath 8 months of someone else's chemistry was enough to walk 2 blocks in the rain and write 12 lines and ask for help. That is not a small thing. That is everything, and I am grateful, I will say it honestly, without embarrassment, that God put Daniel Reyes in that restaurant on that night. That, of all the places a 22-year-old man with his father's eyes could have been working on Father's Day. He was there, standing at that service station with a water pitcher, watching, waiting for the right moment to say what had needed saying for 21 years. I do not think that was an accident. I am not a man who believes in accidents. Not anymore. Connor calls every morning at 8 o'clock. He has not missed a day since Father's Day. We do not always talk long. Sometimes it is 5 minutes. Sometimes it is 1. Sometimes he just calls to say he is on his way into the city and he wanted me to know he was thinking of us. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is the whole inheritance. Right there. Passing back and forth across a phone line every morning at 8 o'clock. Daniel comes for dinner on Sundays. Rosa comes twice a month and brings something she has baked and sits in the kitchen with Maeve, and they talk the way women talk when they have earned each other's trust directly. Without performance, about the things that actually matter. The Honda is still in the driveway. The transmission still makes that grinding noise. I have an appointment at the shop on Thursday. Some things you fix when you can. If this story found its way to you tonight, if you recognized something in it, if you saw yourself sitting at one of those tables, on either side of that dinner, I want to ask you one thing. Who have you been keeping the silence with? Not a complicated question. You know the answer already. You have known it since before you started watching this. There is a person, and there is a silence. And there is a question that has been sitting unasked for longer than it should have been. Go ask it. Not tomorrow, tonight, if you can. Before the fire finds the wall you didn't know was dry. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me about someone you're going to call. I read every one, and on the nights when I can't sleep, and the house is quiet, and I am sitting in this chair listening to Maeve breathe. Those comments are better company than I know how to say. And if you want to hear more stories, stories about ordinary people doing the quiet, costly, essential work of showing up for each other, I would be grateful for your company. God bless you. And thank you for walking with me tonight.